Chapter 32, The Love of the Dead. As Draco sprinted through the halls of Hogwarts alongside Hermione, everything about the castle felt disconcertingly out of balance. The portraits that once filled the walls with vibrant life were now empty. Cozy study nooks had collapsed, blending into the chaos around them. Peering into a classroom where desks lay overturned and smoldering, Draco caught a glimpse through a gaping hole in the wall into the shattered tiles of the prefect's bathroom. It was all wrong, but nothing felt as devastating as the truth that weighed heavily on his heart. They were too late. Harry had more than enough time to reach the Forbidden Forest. He must already be dead. But how could that be? Draco felt that unsettling sensation again, like water pressing against his inner ear. How could Harry Potter, so integral to Draco's understanding of Hogwarts, as essential as the very stones of the castle, be gone? Hermione was openly weeping as they ran. Ron's face was pale with fear. Lupin and Tonks urged them on, their voices rising in urgency. In a moment of instinct, Draco stopped to snatch a wand from the hand of a fallen Death Eater, quickly tucking the Elder Wand deep into his robes. As they rushed down the first-floor corridor, they passed dozens of injured allies, some lying on the ground and others propped against the walls, with Madame Pomfrey tending to them. "Harry," they paused to ask, "have you seen Harry Potter?" But no one had. Draco hadn't truly expected him to reveal himself from the invisibility cloak. They pressed on, the low moans of pain echoing through the hall, but the most chilling sounds came from ahead. They barreled down the steps into the entrance hall and froze at the threshold of the Great Hall. Hermione fell silent, her tears momentarily forgotten in shock. The 4 house tables stood against the walls, and sprawled across the stone floor were rows upon rows of the fallen. Just feet away, Padma Patil and Michael Corner knelt beside the small body of Colin Creevey, their expressions as blank as the lifeless forms around them. At the end of the hall, Dobby and Winky wailed softly alongside the other house elves, mourning the loss that hung heavy in the air. Several elves lay upon bed sheets and towels, their forms a stark reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. In one corner, Fred and George were nearly obscured by the cluster of their mourning family. Molly Weasley had collapsed between them, her mouth open in a silent scream, tears streaming down her cheeks. "My mother," Draco thought numbly, scanning the rows of bodies for a familiar blonde head, dreading the moment he might find her. Instead, his gaze fell on other faces he recognized. Sturgis Podmore, Lavender Brown. Parvati Patil was overcome with such violent sobs over her best friend's body that it seemed to consume her. But perhaps the most heartbreaking were those whose bodies lay alone and unrecognized, with no one left to mourn them. Hermione placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, wordlessly sharing in the weight of the moment. Draco turned to see his mother standing in the entrance hall, not 10 feet away. Narcissa appeared ghostly, almost translucent. A wave of relief washed over him, yet he remained frozen, unsure whether to step closer or brace himself for whatever words might come from her lips. The memory of her terrible scream on the Gringotts steps echoed in his mind. Would she look at him and see his father? Did she blame him for the fact that Lucius was among the fallen of this endless day and night? Then, Narcissa swept toward him and cradled his face in her hands. "My son," she whispered, her voice trembling. She wrapped her arms around him in a crushing embrace, eyes tightly shut. Draco placed his hands on her shivering back, grounding himself in her presence. Moments later, the heavy crack of the front door's opening jolted him back to reality, followed by the amplified voices of Remus and Tonks echoing across the grounds. "Harry! Harry!" Draco pulled back from his mother just as Ron, torn by the sight of his grieving family, sprinted after Remus and Tonks. Hermione hesitated, glancing between them. "Go," Draco urged, squeezing her hand. She didn't need to be told twice. "Hominum revelio," she called out. Racing through the threshold, wand held high, "This way." "Draco," Narcissa said, turning toward the steps. "We must leave the castle before the Dark Lord launches his second attack. We need to find safety." "Safety? Mother, if the order falls tonight, there's nowhere we'll be safe," he replied, desperation creeping into his voice. "Anywhere is better than this castle. Come." She grasped his wrist, urgency in her grip. "You and I will not change the course of this war." She tried to pull him forward, but Draco had grown taller than her, and her strength was not enough. Gently yet firmly, he placed his hand over hers and worked his wrist free. "I already have," he said softly. A moment of silence hung between them. "Yes," she murmured at last. "I know." Her eyes searched his face, filled with a strained curiosity. "What is it?" With a subtle, graceful movement of her head, she added, "You've become a man without my noticing." The tightness in Draco's chest intensified. His mother would never say such a thing lightly. After 17 years of trying to shelter him, she must genuinely see him as a grown man. Yet, in that moment, he didn't feel polished and complete as he had always imagined manhood to be when he looked at his father. Instead, he felt a wave of sickness at the sight of the great hall, haunted by the fear that he might spot his mother. Pansy, or Goyle among the fallen. No, he was no longer a boy, yet he felt as if his boyhood was surfacing, flapping its terrified wings against his chest. "You go to the evacuation point," he instructed her. "The Death Eaters can't get inside. It's on the 7th floor, opposite the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy. If things go wrong, I'll meet you in, no." Her tone was clipped, resolute. "Whatever we do, it will be together." Before Draco could respond, another voice echoed through the halls of Hogwarts, silencing even the sobs in the Great Hall. "Harry Potter is dead." A wave of shock rippled through the Great Hall. The Weasleys stumbled to their feet, their faces pale and stricken. "He was killed as he ran away, trying to save himself while you laid down your lives for him. We bring you his body as proof that your hero is gone." Ginny burst into the entrance hall, wild-eyed, followed closely by Padma, Cho, Ernie Macmillan, Dobby, and Winky, alongside all the Hogwarts professors. Voldemort's voice echoed ominously, "The battle is won. You have lost half of your fighters, our forces outnumber you, and the boy who lived is finished. There must be no more war. For the good of the wizarding world, anyone who continues to fight in the name of Harry Potter, man, woman, or child, will be eliminated, along with every member of their family. Come out of the castle now. Give your allegiance to the ministry, and you shall be spared. Your parents and children, your brothers and sisters will live and be forgiven, and you will join me in the new world we shall build together." The Great Hall emptied rapidly as fear and disbelief took hold. Students and faculty alike poured into the entrance hall. Even the wounded hobbled out, leaning on their companions, murmuring in disbelief that this could not be real. Draco stood frozen beside his mother as the crowd surged around them, gazing through the wide-open front doors toward the dark outline of the Forbidden Forest. Deep down, he knew it was real. Harry had done what he promised time and again. Just a day before, though it felt like a lifetime, he had told the Order at headquarters, "I can decide what kind of world I want to live in, or die for. I made that choice years ago." Now, Draco felt himself moving toward the door with the rest of the crowd, his mother at his side. "We bring you his body as proof." He had to see it, he had to be sure. And he had to find Hermione. If Harry's sacrifice had destroyed the Horcrux within him, and if Snape had succeeded in killing the snake, then Lord Voldemort would be vulnerable. For the first time in half a century, Voldemort was mortal. He had to be killed, now, here, because if he escaped this battle alive, he could tear his soul once more and hide new Horcruxes where they might never be discovered. They stepped onto the dark grass. And Draco spotted Hermione at the front of their allies' ranks. Pushing through the crowd, he finally reached her. Her face was ashen, her eyes filled with fear and disbelief, and neither of them could find the words to speak. She slipped her hand into his, squeezing it so tightly that it hurt. From the woods, the Death Eaters emerged, a slow tide of shadows creeping across the grounds. A hush fell over the Hogwarts fighters. Voldemort had not lied, they were vastly outnumbered. For every one of the Order's allies, there were 2 Death Eaters or Ministry members. No. A raw scream pierced the air from somewhere along the Order's line. It took Draco a moment to recognize the voice as Professor McGonagall's. But he saw her swaying in the grass, just a step away from the front line. Then he saw it too, Voldemort gliding up the grounds, tall and skeletal. At his side walked Bellatrix Lestrange, a grotesque mark like a blistered hand marring her face. Draco realized instantly that this was Voldemort's retribution for the loss of the Cup of Hufflepuff. It had nothing to do with the Order. On Voldemort's right, Severus Snape walked with an impassive expression, his wand extended. Harry's lifeless body hung eerily in the air at the tip of Snape's wand, his glasses precariously perched on his thin nose. Cries erupted from the crowd. "Harry!" Hermione half sobbed, half screamed, while Ron shouted, "No!" And Ginny cried out something unintelligible amidst the chaos, but Draco stood frozen in silence, a chill spreading through him. Harry Potter, limp and lifeless, the dead in the Great Hall. His own father on the steps of Gringotts, it all felt so senseless. Just months ago, Draco had sat in a chip shop in Muggle London, witnessing the emptiness of the Death Eater's cause. Now, the lives of hundreds had been sacrificed to fill that void. He understood that those around him would never stop fighting, but given their dwindling numbers, it seemed impossible for them to reach Voldemort. So many more lives would be lost, and for what purpose? The enemy surged up the grounds, stopping just 20 paces from the Order's lines. For a time, Voldemort remained silent, seemingly savoring the sounds of rage and anguish that washed over him, his eyes lingering with twisted affection on those who wept and screamed. When Draco finally tore his gaze away from Harry's lifeless body, he realized it was even worse than he had feared. The great snake slithered at Voldemort's heels, stirring within her starry, enchanted cage. "Snape hasn't done it," Ron whispered, his voice hollow. "Why?" That enchantment," Hermione said, wiping her tears. "It must be something only Voldemort can alter. Then it's impossible for anyone to get to her." "No, it's an act of enchantment. If he's going to fight us, he'll have to disperse it." Hermione released Draco's hand and drew her wand, a fierce mix of rage and grief etched across her face. "The snake mustn't get away." "It won't," Draco murmured, his fingers brushing the box in his pocket that held 3 basilisk fangs. Then, Voldemort's voice boomed, amplified and commanding, "Silence." With a flash and a bang from his wand, silence enveloped the scene. "It is over. Set him down, Snape, at my feet, where he belongs." Snape lowered his wand, and Harry's body floated gently to the grass. Voldemort began to pace slowly behind him, his robes whispering through the grass. His bloodless face glowed eerily in the dim light. "You see? Harry Potter is dead," Voldemort declared. "You must act reasonably. Think of your families. Would you really squander your own lives, and theirs, for a killer raised among Muggles, who sought to destroy the wizarding world? Liar." Ron shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. The Order erupted into a chorus of outrage, a wave of fury sweeping across the grounds. The spell had broken, but how? Draco pondered in confusion. Voldemort thrust his wand forward once more. With a second, louder bang, silence enveloped them again. "Surely not all of you are so foolhardy." His amplified voice boomed. "Come now, even if you somehow believe the boy is innocent of the crimes that have followed him year after year, accident after tragic accident, would you really charge into death for the memory of a boy with no particular talent? Who allowed so many to die for him?" He paused, standing just beside Harry. "There must be someone among you who will see reason. There must be at least one." His crimson eyes scanned the ranks of the Order. Draco felt a chill run through him as he realized Voldemort's gaze would soon land on him. The Dark Lord's snake-like face feigned surprise, but Draco knew this was no coincidence. "What is this?" Voldemort said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Draco Malfoy, one of my own house. One of my own Death Eaters, the fearless few who have tried for so many years to preserve our wizarding customs. Draco Malfoy, of such noble lineage, seduced into the Order's seditious ways? Surely not. Come, Draco. Return to stand at my side, and all will be forgiven." He lifted his wandless hand and beckoned him forward. "Protego." Draco thought desperately, brandishing his wand, but whatever wandless spell Voldemort had cast pierced through his shield charm. In an instant, Draco felt himself yanked forward, like a fish caught on a line. he was pulled from the crowd, hearing Hermione and Narcissa cry out in alarm, and then he found himself on his knees on the grass, mere feet away from Voldemort. A hush fell over the order behind him as Draco stood there, his gaze fixed on the cold, merciless face of Lord Voldemort. The night wind whipped through the grass, heightening the tension in the air. "I wondered if I might see you here, Draco," Voldemort said, his voice a soft hiss that somehow carried across the grounds, "but I was sure you would choose to ally yourself with wizard kind. Your aunt has told me that your father remained loyal to his last breath, despite his shortcomings. I know you to be a devoted son. Surely, you will stand in honor of Lucius's memory?" It was a taunt, and Draco felt a heated surge of rage rising within him. He had to think, to formulate a plan. The snake, he couldn't let his eyes stray toward Nagini, but the thought lingered in his mind. Could he pretend to accept Voldemort's offer to gain access to her? She was right there, undulating in her enchanted cage. Yet even if he managed to stab her with one of the fangs hidden in his pocket, how would he escape with his life? Could he somehow devise a plan with Snape? Would the order create a distraction? He glanced over his shoulder. Most of the crowd stood frozen, paralyzed with fear, afraid to move lest Voldemort strike him down on the spot. But at the front, Ron and Ginny were struggling to restrain Hermione, while Mr. and Mrs. Weasley held his mother back, their mouths opened in silent screams of desperation. A sense of understanding began to dawn on Draco, his thoughts of plots and schemes unraveled, leaving his mind eerily quiet. They were being held back because the ground beneath him was marked for death. As surely as any grave, he knelt alone on the dark grass, knowing that no help would come to him here. Voldemort didn't expect him to return to the Death Eaters. He had lured him out into the open for torture and humiliation before his inevitable death, to serve as a grim reminder of what happened to the disloyal. There would be no escape. Escaping with his life, not this time. "Well?" Voldemort asked, his voice cutting through the tension. Draco took a moment to gather his thoughts. Then, he stood tall, straightened his robes, and swept his hair back with determination. Once, he had groveled at the Dark Lord's feet, pleading for mercy. But now, Voldemort would not take his pride or dignity again. "Kill me, then, if that's your plan," he said, his tone as cold and scathing as it had ever been at Hogwarts when addressing someone he deemed beneath him. "But don't make me stand here and listen to you talk." Voldemort's eyes widened ever so slightly. A few stunned, fearful laughs rippled through the ranks of the order behind Draco, and he felt a strange, exhilarating leap in his stomach, as if he were soaring through the air on his Nimbus 2001. You dare," spat Bellatrix, her face flushing a deep, humiliated red around the burned handprint. "Let me kill him myself, my lord. Let me wipe this stain from my family tree." Voldemort regarded Bellatrix with icy disdain. And Draco noticed her flinch at the look. Then, the Dark Lord's piercing red eyes returned to Draco, and he braced himself for the impossible pain that awaited him. The sheer lunacy of having spoken to Voldemort in such a way hung heavily in the air, and yet he knew he would be dead within the hour. Why should he hold his tongue? Why shouldn't he express himself freely? A rush of painful memories surged through him as he recalled how Hermione used to laugh at his dry retorts, sprawled on the library floor with a cushion beneath her hair, a book cradled to her chest. But he couldn't dwell on Hermione. That would lead him to think of the life they might have shared. The future he had longed for with her felt cruelly close in that moment. Shimmering just out of reach, like 1,000 glittering pieces waiting to coalesce into something whole. In the end, he had his mother's love. He had a family, Tonks, Remus, and little Teddy. He had Pansy, Goyle, and the allies he'd forged in the Order, but above all, he had Hermione. They had been so close to breaking through the dark clouds into a world that would welcome them. Maybe, Draco thought, this was what it meant to become a man, to feel a yearning that was larger than himself. He stood frozen, bracing for the Cruciatus curse. Instead, he heard the smooth voice of Severus Snape. "My lord, might I suggest you take this opportunity to remind the boy of his loyalties? It seems only fitting to purge Slytherin House of a blood traitor with the symbol of our house." Snape turned his dark eyes to Nagini, and Draco understood the plan immediately. He wondered if Voldemort would see through it, if he would sense the danger, but the malice on Voldemort's face was shifting into excitement. The Dark Lord's arrogance prevailed, and he saw only a delightfully symbolic act of sadism from a servant who had never failed him. "Good," Voldemort whispered to Snape. "Yes, very good, Severus." He raised his voice, letting it echo off the Hogwarts facade. "Young Draco has volunteered to demonstrate what happens to those who continue to fight when the battle is lost." He lifted his wand. Draco quickly unlatched the box of basilisk fangs from his pocket. "No." His stomach twisted at the sound of Hermione's voice. Once again, Voldemort's silencing charm had faltered. And he heard the cries of the Order, the sound of footsteps striking the dewy grass. He knew even before he turned that Hermione had broken free. She would collide with him, seizing his arm at the elbow, her tear-streaked face defiant. He wanted to tell her to go back, to push her away to safety, but it was too late. She was already scanning the masked ministry workers, raising her voice. "Don't you see?" she demanded. "Can't you see why they want to hurt Draco? It's because he used to believe all the lies they told you about Muggleborns, house elves, werewolves, and everything else. If a Malfoy can realize that none of it matters, then anyone can. It's not too late for all of you to see the truth." Suddenly, another voice broke through the tension. Ron was sprinting across the no-man's land to join them. Voldemort never intended to save the wizarding world. He shouted, "He's here to take over the ministry, and you're just going to stand there and let him." A chorus of agreement erupted from the ranks of the Order. Draco noticed the ministry workers shifting uneasily, though no one dared to speak. He could see a few heads turning with uncertainty. The truth? Voldemort's cold, mirthless voice sliced through the air. "A mudblood and a blood traitor, responsible for hundreds of deaths at Malfoy Manor and Azkaban, dare to tell you the truth. Of course, we already know what they would do if allowed to encroach upon our orderly wizarding society. We've witnessed the toll they've taken on innocent magical families. How considerate of these two criminals to offer themselves up so freely. It is time for justice to be served." Draco, Hermione, and Ron instinctively drew their wands, but a barrage of disarming charms erupted from the mass of Death Eaters, far too many to block. Their wands flew from their hands, leaving them defenseless. Draco hesitated to reclaim the Elder Wand. What if, contrary to Harry's assumptions, it recognized Voldemort as its true master? So, he stood there, unarmed, alongside Hermione and Ron. Voldemort raised his wand once more. Hermione tightened her grip on Draco's arm, and he heard her whisper. Barely audible, "I love you." He managed to whisper it back, knowing deep down it might be their last moment together. Their eyes locked for a fleeting instant, and if this was to be the end, at least they shared this final connection. Her face illuminated by the starlight. "Look," Voldemort commanded, "and see how the blood of Salazar Slytherin protects the wizarding world from those who would defile it." With a swift motion, Voldemort slashed his wand downward, and a fissure opened in Nagini's enchanted cage. He hissed a command in Parseltongue, and the massive snake lunged forward, her jaws wide and fangs glistening. She was 10 feet away, then 5. Yells from their allies filled the air. And Draco could hear the thunder of feet as the Order charged into battle. He quickly thrust his hand into his pocket and pulled out the box. Hermione and Ron were ready. They all seized basilisk fangs, but barely had they raised their weapons when the snake was upon them. They scattered, narrowly dodging her deadly strike. As the first spells began to crisscross between the Order and the Death Eaters, they were forced to throw themselves flat to the ground. Almost immediately, jets of spells erupted into a deluge of light, curses and hexes whizzing toward Voldemort so rapidly that he became nearly impossible to see. Draco brought his fang down repeatedly, but Nagini's tail writhed with frantic speed. Ron threw himself onto the back of the thrashing serpent, attempting to hold her in place long enough to pierce her tough hide, but she was a formidable 12 feet of pure muscle. The scaled tail lashed out, striking the side of Ron's head and knocking him aside. Dazed, he reeled as Nagini surged toward him like a bolt of dark lightning. A vengeful shriek erupted from the crowd behind them. Just as Nagini's jaws gaped wide, Pansy knocked Ron out of harm's way. The Order's front line had reached them. Now, two more figures dove onto the snake, pinning its midsection far more effectively than Ron had: Gregory Goyle and Neville Longbottom. The others joined in, with Hermione holding Nagini's tail in place while Pansy and Ron worked to subdue the massive creature. Draco pressed the diamond-shaped head of the basilisk down into the grass. With a fierce determination, he lifted his fang high and plunged it into the base of the snake's neck. Voldemort, engaged in a fierce duel with several of their frontline allies, let out a furious scream. Draco could see the realization dawn on Voldemort's face as he registered the betrayal represented by the basilisk fangs. A brilliant crimson light shot from Voldemort's wand, blasting the dueling combatants backward, one after another. He whirled to his right, wand raised high, ready to strike Snape, but Snape was no longer there. The potion's master had leaped out of the front line of Death Eaters, heading toward a spot several paces in front of Voldemort. He wasn't alone. Remus was racing toward the same location, his eyes wide with shock, a reaction Draco didn't comprehend until he followed Lupin's gaze. Both men were hurtling toward Harry's lifeless body. Except Harry was no longer lifeless. Draco felt a jolt of disbelief wash over him as he saw Harry thrusting his hands into his robes, pulling out his wand. He was alive. Snape and Remus had arrived just in time because Voldemort had noticed too. He screamed a killing curse, but spells erupted from Snape's and Remus's wands simultaneously. Snape's incantation raised the ground before Harry like a cresting wave of earth, absorbing the green jet of light into the grass. Meanwhile, Remus cast a shimmering barrier between Harry and Voldemort. By the time Voldemort dispelled it with a dark smoke that consumed the points of light, Harry was back on his feet. Snape and Remus stood resolutely before him, forming a protective barrier between Voldemort and the son of Lily and James. A great shout erupted from the crowd as the Order turned toward Harry. "He's alive." "Harry!" "Wait!" Harry shouted, wand raised. Draco's hands were outstretched, yet others were pulling him back into the safety of the crowd. Voldemort unleashed a spell, its incantation sending a jolt of pain through Draco's teeth and splitting the air with a crack like lightning. A dark, swirling mass materialized before Voldemort. Then split in two. One blast struck Snape in the chest, while the other hit Remus. The two men fell side by side, lifeless. Chaos erupted as the crowd surged inward, their front lines colliding with the Death Eaters. Draco still clutched the basilisk fang in one numbed hand, the other resting on Nagini's scaly skin. His ears rang, and though he knew Remus and Snape were gone, he couldn't tear his gaze away from their bodies. Memories flooded his mind, Remus bursting into headquarters, calling out Teddy's name, and the boy Snape crouching in the bushes at the playground so many years ago. Suddenly, Hermione was there, tugging him to his feet, a bruise darkening her cheek as she thrust a wand into his hand. As they stood back to back, ready to fight, a strange sound echoed from above, like 1,000 hounds baying. Draco tilted his head upward, and his heart froze. Charlie Weasley was swooping down at the head of 50 Dragonette riders, shouting commands in French, then Bulgarian, to the 100 broom riders flanking them. Thin, powerful bursts of flame shot toward the Death Eaters' rear ranks, forcing those caught in the fire to flee toward the lake, screaming. Then, another thunderous noise resonated from the far reaches of the grounds. Centaurs, Thestrals, and Hippogriffs charged out of the Forbidden Forest. At the Hogwarts gate, Aberforth Dumbledore led a flood of reinforcements on foot, families of the students. Hundreds of supporters who had been quietly sustaining the Order's efforts from across the nation for months. "Where's Harry gone?" Hermione shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. At the far end of the Fallen Serpent, Ron was frantically scanning his surroundings, still struggling to rise to his feet. It was then that Draco noticed Pansy, slumped against Ron, her eyes barely open. Dark stains marred her side. She had pushed Ron out of the way just in time, but Nagini had bitten her. A chill washed over Draco. He tried to move toward them, but his mother grabbed him by the shoulder, pulling him back just as a bright orange curse whizzed past, striking a Death Eater standing close behind. The sickening crack of bones echoed in his ears, followed by a howl of agony. Draco shot a glance back, his and his mother's forearms locked together, and spotted Bellatrix just 10 steps away, her eyes gleaming with bloodlust. He saw her lips form the word, finally, a silent snarl lost in the chaos around them. She raised her wand, and though no spell left her lips, fighters instinctively dove out of the way, unwilling to stand between Bellatrix Lestrange and her target. As the last bystanders cleared the space, rushing into their own duels nearby, Draco, Narcissa, and Hermione stood shoulder to shoulder, ready to face Bellatrix. The duel began. Bellatrix moved with an unnatural speed, her dark robes swirling around her. Barely had Draco conjured the spells, Incarcerus, Stupefy, Levi Corpus, when she was already deflecting them. Her own curses tore deep into the earth at their feet, igniting patches of grass into flames, and one searing spell sliced a painful gash into Draco's side. He stifled a cry, knowing that if Hermione or his mother turned to check on him, it could mean their doom. Then, with a swift motion, Bellatrix directed her wand toward the fallen snake. Horror gripped Draco as its 12-foot body shuddered back to life, its lifeless jaws gaping and dripping, fangs snapping menacingly in their direction. Sectum Sempra. Draco shouted, bringing his wand down with determination. The battle was far from over. Her body disintegrated under the force of the slashing curse. Hardly had her puppet fallen when Bellatrix unleashed a barrage of new curses toward them, but now, two more had spotted openings amid the chaos and leaped into the fray, Bill and Ginny Weasley, consumed by grief. Under their relentless assault, Bellatrix began to falter. Hermione's hex singed her sleeve, while Bill's spell ensnared her left arm with a twist of conjured rope. "No more, Bella!" Narcissa shouted, her thin face contorted with rage. "It's over." Bellatrix's wild eyes zeroed in on her sister. Her teeth were bared, a mixture of loathing and despair etched across her features. With the Dark Lord's mark burned into her face, Draco realized she had lost his favor forever, and with it, everything. Instead of aiming her wand at Narcissa, she turned it toward Draco. "Avada," she snarled. Draco raised his wand, desperate to conjure some sort of barrier, but before Bellatrix could finish her incantation, a jet of dark red flame erupted from Narcissa's wand, searing across her sister's chest. Bellatrix spun backward, collapsing onto the grass just a few steps away from where Voldemort was dueling McGonagall, Kingsley, and Slughorn. Draco stared at his mother, her face etched with cold fury, her eyes bright as she lowered her wand. He could hear, rather than see, Voldemort's fury as it collided with Bellatrix's fallen body. The Dark Lord's rage erupted like dragonfire, blasting a crater into the ground, dirt and bloodied grass scattering outward, and sending McGonagall, Kingsley, and Slughorn flying through the air. As the dust began to settle, and Voldemort searched for new victims, a voice rang out, "Enough." Harry stepped into the crater, onto the dark, soft earth, and in that moment, Draco knew exactly what he had to do. He drew the Elder Wand from the depths of his robes and moved through the crowd, who were shifting to form a new reality. An immense ring encircled the blast site, so, Voldemort sneered, "The boy who lived has come to die. Who will you hide behind this time, Potter?" "No one." Harry replied firmly, "No more shields, no more lifelines. It has to end like this." "Oh, I don't think anyone here will believe that." Voldemort turned his head, as if sharing a private joke with the crowd. "We all know that wherever the boy who lived walks, others fall around him. Who will it be this time, Potter? Who will you allow me to kill next for your own survival?" "You're not going to kill any of these people." Harry's voice rose, filled with defiance. "You're not going to touch them ever again. It's just you and me, Riddle. You, me, and this." He glanced back as Draco stepped up to the edge of the crater and placed the Elder Wand into Harry's hand. Voldemort regarded the wand for a long moment. Then, a sinister smile spread across his thin lips, and he began to laugh. The sound echoed across the grounds, ringing over the lake. "The Elder Wand, at last," he hissed. "Fate favors Lord Voldemort today. Yes, Potter, duel me with the Elder Wand, and let's see how it holds allegiance to its true master." "I'm counting on that," Harry responded, his resolve unwavering. Voldemort's smile twisted into something darker. "You foolish boy, did you not see me strike down Severus Snape, the last master of the Elder Wand? Do you not understand? He suddenly halted, pointing a skeletal finger up the slope toward the spot where Snape and Remus had fallen, just steps from the shattered form of Nagini. But the bodies of the two men were no longer there. Like I said, Riddle, Harry said quietly. He turned his head ever so slightly, and as Draco followed his gaze, his mouth fell open in disbelief. There they were, stepping forward through the ranks of the crowd, Remus Lupin and Severus Snape, supported by the Hogwarts teachers. Each man was bandaged across his chest, but without a doubt, they were alive. Voldemort's blood-red eyes widened in disbelief. He glanced back at Harry, clearly waiting for an explanation, and began to circle the crater, with Harry moving in the opposite direction. Didn't you notice your silencing charms couldn't hold them? Harry said, his voice steady. Didn't you realize what that meant? I've done what my mother did for me. I walked into that forest to die for them, but you did not. Voldemort interrupted. I did, Harry replied quietly. I've been there, the place you're so afraid of. I stood right at the door of death, and I've seen what you'll become. Voldemort aimed his wand at Harry, almost convulsively. It was clear that not even the return of Snape and Remus had rattled him as much as Harry's words. What I will become. You think that you, a boy with no exceptional magical talent, can overcome me when I am the master of the wand in your hand? Perhaps Snape survived, but I cast the curse that struck him. You still don't understand, Riddle, Harry replied. You dare, yes, I dare. I know things you don't know, Tom Riddle. I know many important things that you don't. Want to hear some before you make another big mistake? Voldemort continued to circle, unfazed. There's no need to remind me that Snape proved himself a traitor and a fool in the end. He shot a glance toward the edge of the crater, but Snape had melted into the crowd. Of course he sought to deceive me, to seize more power for himself. Such things are not difficult to grasp, Potter. Power had nothing to do with it. You lost Snape's loyalty the moment you started hunting down my mother, my Muggle-born mother, because he loved her for nearly his entire life. Since they were children. Don't you remember him asking you to spare her life? He desired her, that was all, Voldemort sneered, but when she was gone, he agreed that there were other women of purer blood, worthier of him. Of course he told you that, Harry replied. But he was Dumbledore's spy from the moment you threatened her. He's been working against you ever since because Dumbledore understood something you couldn't. Dumbledore, Voldemort spat, his voice dripping with disdain. Dumbledore lies dead upon these very grounds. He cast a contemptuous glance toward the edge of the lake, where the white tomb loomed like a gray shadow in the twilight. See what good Dumbledore's understanding did when Snape killed him. He seemed unable to contain the truth that slipped from his lips, on my command. Wrong again. Snape didn't kill Dumbledore on your orders, Riddle. They planned his death together. Harry raised the Elder Wand. Do you see it now? Voldemort prowled along the edge of the crater, his eyes now locked onto the Elder Wand. Very well. So, you suggest that Dumbledore died the true master of the Elder Wand, but that will do you no good, Potter. It means we duel on skill alone. You're forgetting something, Harry said, stopping in his tracks beside Draco. He had come full circle, am I? Voldemort replied, a hint of curiosity in his voice. What might that be? Me, Draco interjected, a surge of satisfaction coursing through him as he saw Voldemort step slow and then come to a halt. Suspicion clouded the Dark Lord's face. Harry glanced back at Draco, who stepped forward into the crater. Remember the task you set me, back when you gave me this? Draco rolled up the sleeve of his robe, revealing the dark mark, stripped of its power. Well, I almost went through with it. I disarmed Dumbledore. I became the master of the Elder Wand. And still you failed to kill him? Voldemort hissed, his voice low and dangerous. You failed to kill Dumbledore, when I would have rewarded you beyond all others. I chose Dumbledore because I saw the way you reward your followers, Draco shot back, his voice sharp and clear. Look at my father. Look at Bellatrix, she lived to please you. The group turned their eyes toward Bellatrix's lifeless form on the ridge of the crater. The crimson mark marring her face. Look at me, Draco said, fixing his gaze on Voldemort's ghostly visage. You sent me, a 16-year-old who would have been loyal to you, into a death trap. And now you're going to pay the price. Earlier tonight, Potter gained control of that wand, and he did it through me. Voldemort had remained impassive as Draco spoke, but now a thin smile crept across his lips. A childish fantasy. If Potter came to me in the forest as the master of the Elder Wand, then its loyalty is, indeed, to me. He raised his wand high. With this wand, I cast the killing curse upon him. You had one last trick up your sleeve to cling to life, Potter, but it boils down to this: I struck a blow against you. I proved myself your superior. You couldn't defend yourself against me. You were cast to the earth by my power, and the wand will recognize that. Harry shook his head. You don't learn from your mistakes, do you, Riddle? It's not that I couldn't defend myself, it's that I chose not to. You think that makes a difference? Voldemort spat, his voice dripping with disdain. It's all the same kind of weakness. It makes all the difference in the world. My mum died to save me, Dumbledore died the way he and Snape planned, and I walked willingly into that forest. These aren't mere accidents. They show that you never truly mastered any of us. We've chosen how we live or die, and what we live or die for. Harry raised the Elder Wand and pointed it directly at Voldemort. It means you never overpowered me tonight, Riddle. You did exactly what I wanted you to do. I'm not afraid of death. Are you? At that moment, a fierce wind swept across the darkened grounds, whipping Draco's hair off his forehead and sending their robes billowing around them. Harry's limbs trembled in the chill as he yelled, his voice cutting through the darkness. Voldemort's shriek joined him, filling the air with a palpable tension. The spells shot from their wands, illuminating the night. Harry's wand glowed with unwavering focus, while Voldemort's face appeared as a greenish blur. Avada Kedavra! He shouted, Expelliarmus! Harry countered. The two spells collided, erupting in a burst of golden flame that scorched the ground at the center of the crater. The crowd flinched from the brilliant light, but Draco, watching closely, noticed the green jet ricochet backward, deflected by the Elder Wand, which recognized not mere force but intent, acknowledging the strength of self-possession over the power of domination. Tom Riddle fell to the earth with an almost mundane finality, his once formidable body now frail and shrunken, his empty white hands and vacant, snake-like face betraying the reality of his defeat. Voldemort was dead, vanquished by his own curse. For one brief, shivering second, silence enveloped the scene, the shock of the moment hanging in the air. Then, the tumult erupted, the roars of the onlookers shattering the stillness. The crowd surged forward into the crater, surrounding Harry, while Draco stepped back, overwhelmed by the sight, people reaching out for Harry, screaming and crying in relief and joy. Nearby, an elderly man sank to his knees, sobbing, one hand pressed against his face. Others embraced, lost in their emotions. Draco craned his neck, searching through the chaos. Where was Hermione? Further from the epicenter, screams and flashes of spell light continued to punctuate the night as the Death Eaters attempted to fight their way free. But now, they were the ones outnumbered, many Ministry members dropping their wands in surrender, hands raised high in defeat. Then he heard her voice. Draco. Hermione called out, cutting through the noise from where the snake lay, where Ron and Pansy still remained. A jolt of fear shot through him at the thought. Harry. Draco called out, glancing back in hopes of dragging Harry along with him. But a throng of Order members surrounded Harry, shouting and pressing in from all sides. The Weasleys, Hagrid, the Hogwarts professors, Luna, Neville, and the rest of Dumbledore's army were all there. Draco knew better than to attempt to pull them away, so he turned and pushed his way through the crowd, straining to follow Hermione's voice. Their allies were shouting their final battle cries as they chased the retreating Death Eaters across the grounds. Stunning many and pursuing others who were desperately trying to escape, Draco finally reached the body of the snake and spotted Hermione. She stood there, wand in hand, her hair whipping wildly in the wind, her expression almost feral. His mouth felt as dry as parchment. In an instant, they collided in a painful tangle of limbs. Draco could feel her trembling, and tears streamed down his face as they sank to the ground, huddling with Ron and Goyle around Pansy. She lay there, limp and pallid. Is she? Draco started, but Ron interrupted fiercely, "Don't touch her." He struggled to hold back his own tears. "Don't. Over here." A sharp voice called from above. They all looked up to see Narcissa hurrying down from the front doors, with Madame Pomfrey bustling closely behind her. The nurse had a bandage plastered over the side of her own neck. The two women knelt beside Pansy. After a moment of insistence, Ron finally let go, allowing Madame Pomfrey to shift Pansy onto the grass. With a steady hand, the nurse touched her wand to Pansy's neck, then to the wound. She carefully cut away the fabric of Pansy's robes over the bite mark and applied a potion that glowed a soft violet before returning her wand tip to the injury. They all watched in tense silence, dreading what she might say. Finally, Madame Pomfrey lowered her wand and spoke. "She will need treatment right away to ensure there's no lasting damage to the nerves." Draco closed his eyes, feeling the weight of fear settle over him. Draco felt a wave of relief wash over him. She was alive, and she was going to be all right. His heart beat faintly, the pain from Bellatrix's cut in his side pulsing in a sluggish rhythm. Ron made a croaking sound but struggled to find his words. Madame Pomfrey stood up. "I'll be back shortly. It may take some time to find a medawizard who can help transport her. The potion should keep the symptoms at bay for now. Please try to move her as little as possible, Mr. Weasley." With that, she hurried off. They watched her leave, and then, in silence, turned their gazes over the grounds. Bodies of the fallen were being carried up to the Great Hall, both their own and those of the enemy. Fires were being doused, and the remnants of transfiguration melted back into earth, stone, and grass. Here and there, Draco spotted clusters similar to their own, groups of 3, 6, or even 12, sitting together, shivering in the early light of the new day. Families and friends huddled together, bracing themselves for what lay ahead. After a few minutes, Draco noticed that the crowd surrounding Harry in the crater had finally thinned. Just as he began to wonder where Harry had gone, he emerged from beneath the invisibility cloak, looking dirt-streaked and utterly exhausted. "Got rid of the fan club, Potter?" Draco quipped. "But I suppose you won't be rid of them after this." "You might find yourself with a fan club too," Harry replied with a faint smile. They all stood up, and Ron and Hermione embraced Harry. Then he shook hands with Draco, Goyle, and Narcissa, but fatigue weighed heavily on them, and they sank back down to the slope of the grounds. "Let's do something about this," Draco suggested, nodding towards the body of the great snake that lay before them. Hermione raised her wand in response, and he followed suit. They began to move their wands in smooth, sweeping motions over the remains. The earth beneath the snake shifted, rolling and turning, and the last Horcrux sank down into the ground. As they buried the snake deeper and deeper with each incantation, all that remained was a dark streak of freshly turned earth, as if the ground had just been tilled. Draco and Hermione lowered their wands, taking a moment to draw a deep breath. It wasn't until the snake was finally concealed that Draco became aware of the lingering scent of blood in the air, but now, a cold, sweet breeze rushed in, sweeping it away. "It doesn't feel real, does it?" Hermione said quietly. "No," replied Draco, Ron, Harry, and Goyle in unison. A subdued laughter rippled among them, but it felt hollow. The weight of the battle still hung over them, like an unshakable spell. Yet, beneath it all, there was a profound relief that resonated with Draco to his very core, a release from the fear that had gripped him since 5th year. A fear he hadn't fully appreciated back then. The exhaustion in his body grew so intense that he felt as if he might collapse right there on the grounds, slipping into unconsciousness. The only thing keeping him upright was Hermione's hand in his and his desire to witness the approaching sunrise. Dawn was definitely on its way. Though the landscape around them remained cloaked in shadows, color was beginning to seep back into the grass, the lake, and the stones of Hogwarts behind them. "It is real, though," Draco murmured to Hermione. "It's over." "No." She lifted his hand to her lips, pressing them gently against his knuckles, her eyes closed. "It's just about to start."